Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Today, I have with me Raziel Cohen. He's known online as a Tactical Rabbi. He's an instructor, I guess a gun guy, let's say. He's one of the few people from the Jewish community that are actually outspoken about firearms. And today, I just want to have a particular conversation with him about a topic that I believe is very important, is about gun safety. So before we start, Raziel, can you introduce yourself?
For sure. So thank you for having me on. My name is Raziel Cohen, professionally known as the Tactical Rabbi. I'm a firearms instructor and a security consultant. I guess I started probably in around 2018 in regards to training with firearms and being more public about them. And 2019 was kind of known as the year of increase in active shootings and things like that. So that's when we realized there had to be something done about that. So since then, I have opened up a company in regards to being able to train people in firearms, as well as also consult people for being able to deal with structural security for facilities to make sure they're actually set up for worst case scenarios.
Nice. So I don't know if you heard the story, but beginning of this week, basically a firearm was found on the street somewhere in Spring Valley, and in the morning, as kids were waiting for the bus, the kids found it. I guess they started playing with it. One of the mothers realized, ran over. They called police. It became a whole big, I guess, hack. So it's something that I think is important. A lot of people were shocked by it. I was shocked as well because I'm thinking about what could have happened. This story could have ended many different ways, and none of them are good. So I think gun safety, so I think it's an important topic, especially since we have so many children around, Baruch Hashem. We're flourishing, and firearms for us is not a common thing. So I think it's a topic that I want to talk on. So I kind of want.
It's interesting because right now there's so much that could be said about children and firearms. I'm sure we're going to get a lot more into it throughout this conversation. But there's untaught rules that are spoken to from people that are involved in the firearms world, where there's two sets of rules. There's these sets of rules that are taught for us being the gun guys, meaning the guys using the firearms, though the four standard rules everyone learns when it comes to being safe with a firearm. However, there are also four firearms rules when it comes to educating your children in being able to be safe around firearms. So it's not something that's necessarily lesser taught, it's lesser known. So just as kind of like an overview, the four rules that a person should be aware of when it comes to children in dealing with firearms is rule number 1 is stop. Rule number 2 is don't touch. Rule number 3 is leave the area. And rule number 4 is tell an adult. So there's a lot of different reasons as to why the structure was put into that way. But being able to educate our children in being aware of what a firearm is and that it is something that's dangerous is also valuable. The same way we'll teach a kid not to touch a knife in the kitchen. We're informing them that it is a thing, but we're also teaching them how to deal with it if something like that comes up with an adult not being in the area.
Right. So before we do a deep dive into that, let's dissect the story and let's start thinking of how it happened, right? So I mean, from my perspective, from what I'm thinking, two things could have happened. Number one, a criminal could have dropped it. And it's an illegal gun, so he just forgets about it. The second thing that could have happened is a responsible gun owner dropped it. Right?
I'll say legal gun owner, not necessarily responsible gun owner.
Got it. So let's talk about the first part. If a criminal drops it, right, then the likelihood of him caring about it is probably slim to none.
Yeah.
Except if he needs it for something immediately. But
So I think generally there's different ways of there's different categories of illegal, right? So the first category is it was stolen, so it means it has an alternate serial number from something that's associated with them. So in that case, they don't care. Or it's an actual ghost gun, not the government standard of a ghost gun, but it's an actual ghost gun, which means that there's no serial associated with that at all. So in that case, also they might have cared that they lost it, but not cared that it would have been found. The reason why I say the legal definition is because a part of the statistics in regards to ghost guns being used in deadly shootings. One of the ways that a gun is able to be categorized as a ghost gun is that even if the number was scratched, so they attempted to remove, even if it's not removed, they attempted to remove the serial number, that goes a part of the statistic of it being classified as a ghost gun, which I guess adds to the number of ghost guns that are associated with crimes, just because that's something that they use as a standard, as a part of that categorization. So just something to take into account.
Right. So let's move to the second scenario, right? I mean, okay, so basically, if a criminal drops a gun, criminals are criminals, and it's the reality of things. Now,
Yeah.
the second possibility, if a responsible gun owner or illegal gun owner dropped it, why does that happen? How can he avoid it from it happening again? And
So there's a lot. There's probably a lot of details that can be spoken about. The one that seems possible, although we kind of hope that it's not actually the case, is because of an incorrect way of carrying the firearm. So if a person was using, let's say, a nylon holster with like a Velcro strap or an elastic strap, which is unfortunately something that's very commonly sold like on Amazon and different easily accessible places. But for people who might not be familiar with proper ways to actually carry and conceal a firearm, it's something that could also have your gun fall out. And you might not even notice it because some people might be carrying it in like an ankle holster. So your constant, like the foot movements that you're doing is going to be natural to you. And then it might have just fell out by a bus stop, and then you might not have noticed that it was missing. So that's probably the most likely in regards to a responsible gun owner, because I don't think someone would have just dropped it and left, because that's not something responsible someone would do. But step one in regards to avoiding it is make sure that you're carrying a firearm correctly, as well as also using not just carrying it correctly, meaning in the right location, but also using the correct holster that would make sure that it stays in place, because that does obviously two things. It makes sure that it stays in place, and also make sure that you'll have a consistent location of being able to draw the firearm and know that it's where it needs to be. If it's moving around to the point that it's able to fall out, that also means that it's probably not structured enough where you'd be able to get a proper draw either. So those are two considerations to think about.
right. So when you say a proper holster, I guess when it comes, people call it a positive click. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
We're not necessarily in the time of a positive click. However, you want to make sure that it fits. So the reason why I say not necessarily positive click is that although I'm not a huge fan of leather holsters, like proper leather holsters do work. Again, I'm not a fan of them just because over time they could wear, and then it's just not something that is able to stay consistent for me personally. However, something like a Kydex holster, which is something that I agree with, does have a positive click, is something that when the gun is inserted, you'll actually hear it click into place, which means something very important. The holster was designed for the firearm that's being put into it. Some people will buy, let's say, a universal holster, something like those nylon holsters you're able to get on Amazon. Those are universal holsters, which means it would work amongst multiple types of firearms, but that's a problem because it means it wasn't made for your firearm, and that's a problem. So having something like a Kydex holster, which means you will get that positive click, means that it's actually fit and set up for that. The second part of the positive click is there's different variations of this, but the type of platform it's being mounted to. So if you have a belt clip that will attach to your belt, having it make sure that it's actually seated properly. So if you have, let's say, the three most common belt widths is 1.5, 1.75, and 2 inches. 2 inches is usually the duty grade. 1.75 is like mid duty grade, and the most common belt commonly available is 1.5 inches. If you get a belt clip that's a 1.5 inch belt clip and you're trying to put it onto a 1.75 belt, that means you won't get that positive click because it won't fit around to secure it. So your holster might be designed for that firearm and it might be able to secure properly to that holster, but it may not be able to fit on your belt, which means that positive click number 2 isn't happening. And that's scary because although everything else might seemingly be okay, it's not actually set to your body correctly.
So the entire holster might slip out. So in other
Correct.
words, it kind of the clip has to go around the belt and hook in. So it doesn't slide. If it's too small, it won't go over. It'll sit like this. Or if it's too big, it'll have room to slide out.
I just gave a class this past week, and a guy had a correct Kydex holster. The holster was fine. The clip was, in my opinion, not the greatest clip, but it works. It wasn't the greatest clip, but it works. The third issue that came up was that the belt he was using was very thin and soft. So even with it being the correct 1.5 to 1.5 connection, since the belt was very thin, it didn't have the hook around it correctly, and he was able to just remove the holster with the firearm to show it to me. but that just showed that it wasn't in place correctly. To be able to remove a holster from your system, it should be a little bit of a process because it should be on securely enough that it might be a little bit, just a little bit difficult to actually take off because it's actually fitting correctly. So to be able to just remove it shows that the fitment of either the belt width, the belt thickness, the clip, or the holster itself are one of those variables are not correct.
Right. And now on to the next thing. So let's say, before we go that, so the gun that was found was a Ruger LCP, the 22 LR version.
Okay.
So they're fairly small. They're like, people call them like a mouse gun.
Yeah.
I think when you buy them, they come with a pocket holster.
Throw out.
Yeah. So what's your take on carrying in the pocket, the pros, the cons?
So you could carry in your pocket. I'm not saying you can't carry in your pocket. You can. However, more likely than not, the holster that's being provided to carry in your pocket is not the holster you want to be able to use to carry in your pocket. Now, I would never carry in my pocket because there's way too many variables of it being able to snag and potentially discharge into my leg, as opposed to being something like, let's say, in the appendix carry or 3 o'clock position. You're able to make sure that you're able to clear all your garments correctly before drawing the firearm, so you know that there's less of that risk. But even for holsters that carry in the pocket, the variables to take into account is the risk of printing, which means that you might be able to see the outline of the firearm if you're using the incorrect holster. And printing obviously is a problem for even if you have a concealed carry license. Printing is a separate category that, as a concealed carry holder, legally and just professionally, you shouldn't be able to see the outline of the firearm. So that's something you want to make sure. Yeah.
Now, before we go further, just so people should know, printing, there's psychological printing, where people think they're printing because they're new to carrying a gun, and they're like scared they have a gun, so they think everybody sees. But then there's actual printing where everybody can clearly see. So
yeah,
I just want to make that aware. Like, a lot of times, especially in the beginning, you put on a gun and it is a bit tight. You know, it's not the same as without it, but most people around it don't realize. They don't analyze every single line on your shirt, on your suit, on your back shirt. But in reality, there are times when it's tight and it's clearly printing. So I just want to separate
the example
that.
that is, some people might use, let's say, the legal definition for concealed carry, right, of being able to conceal carry is that the gun is not visible. So what that means is that even if you're having an outside the waistband holster and you have a suit jacket on top of it, that's considered concealed carry because the gun is not visible anymore. Now, what a person might do is they'll get an outside the waistband holster. They'll take their tightly fit t-shirt and put it over it, and that legally counts as concealed carry. But then you bend over at a supermarket or whatever it is, and either you start brandishing, which means the gun actually becomes visibly exposed, or because of the tightness of the t-shirt, it kind of conforms to the type of holster or gun that you have, and that would be printing. That would be a problem.
Right. And there's one other thing you said about snagging. Can you explain exactly what it means with the trigger, how it works? And
so snagging is when you're going to draw the firearm, but it gets caught up on something. Now, there's many different ways this is able to happen. Even in an appendix, which is generally a very common way to be able to conceal carry a firearm. If you were to try to pick up your shirt and then reach for your firearm to be able to remove it, if your shirt is here and it's out, meaning it's not close to your body, it's out, then you could be snagging against your own hand as you're coming out and it locks up. So if you're going to be removing it from a holster, like that's the holster that's inside your pocket, so any kind of pocket carry, since there's a lot of material that you're able to run into, or under stress, you might start trying to reach very aggressively to grab it. You have all the up, down, right, and left directions that you're able to actually have the gun snag in, which is why generally it's not something that I personally would recommend. For us also, being like religious Jews, if we're wearing tzitzis, right, so our garments that are underneath our shirt, we have strings that hang out off the right side of our body. And reholstering the gun, especially during classes I've given, is very scary because you keep reminding people that before they reholster the firearm, they need to make sure that nothing will get into the trigger guard. So coming out and putting it back in, you have to be very, very aware.
Right. And of course, if for whatever reason you do carry a pistol in your pocket, make sure there's nothing else in that pocket. No keychains, no
nothing.
Coins. Nothing should be there. You'll eliminate the chance of anything going wrong. That's
a part of the reason why I don't carry, because us as guys, we like to carry way too many things. So if I'm just completely losing that pocket to one item, then it's just not as ideal.
Right. Right. What is your take? The other possible someone can think, oh, what if the guy had it like in his Talis bottle? The gun. What do you say
And
about
and saying,
that?
are we talking about the way the firearm was found, or we're saying in general, just having it inside there?
It was lost. So what other possibilities? So let's say he had it in his talus bottle and it slipped out.
So if you're going to have it in any kind of bag, whether that's going to be in your talus bag or anything, right? What I would personally do is my talus bag would be set up with kind of like the Vertex style design. Well, Vertex is a company that makes a lot of different bags and gear. And what a lot of their gear has is that the internal pockets of some of their bags is like soft side Velcro. So what I would do is I would personally make it that the inside of my talus bag, or whether it means that I'm adding it manually or I would just get it designed that way, would be soft side Velcro, so that I could attach a Kydex holster that would stick to it. Because I would want to make sure that, again, for two reasons. Similar to like a woman's purse, if you like ask a guy to find something in his wife's purse, we have no idea where things are. They might have an idea, but we have no concept, right? With firearms, it can't be like that. Meaning, if I reach into a bag to be able to draw a gun, if it's not exactly where I expect it to be, that's a problem. So you can't have it flopping around. Even if you have a trigger guard holster, and technically speaking, it's safe, that's not okay. So what it would have to be is that I would want it with a Kydex holster attached to soft side Velcro or some form of attachment where I know that it would be consistent in its location, as well as also reducing the risk of it actually falling out, because that would be obviously a huge problem.
Right. And also, what about the safety risks of other people, unauthorized users, gaining access to that?
So that's the thing also, is that I never like off-body carry. There's many reasons why, especially a lot of women prefer off-body carry because you're able to carry it in a purse or a bag. But the most watered down version of why it could be a problem is if you're in a parking lot and you're loading up stuff into your vehicle and you have your purse on, right? If a person's just not trying to be violent, just trying to steal something from you, the first thing they see is a purse. They're going to rip the purse off you that you're keeping on you because you know there's a firearm in it. So you're being safe in regards to making sure that you have access to the firearm. But now they're coming to steal your purse, not the gun. And now you're fighting for the purse, which they're fighting for the money, and you're fighting for the weapon. So it becomes a very, very scary situation because you're now being targeted for something other than something potentially violent that could turn very violent very quickly.
Right. But I would also say, in terms of the safety for children, you have the ability for kids to gaining access to it.
I would say that if I carried a purse or if I carried a bag, what my rule would be is that if I knew there was a gun in it, my kids are not allowed to touch it. Like, that becomes a no-touch item. So yes, there is that risk, but also as a responsible gun owner, I make certain rules that you could choose to live your lifestyle that way, but there has to be very aggressive and non-negotiable rules in regards to that item, because that has now become a defensive tool or something that could be higher risk. So I'm not against it, but you just have to be very firm on those policies.
Right. The other thing that I'm concerned, let's say you're in shul, you're davening, and you have your talus bag in front of you, and you have to run to the bathroom or something, and right next to you is a candy man. And a kid goes over, wants to grab a candy, and he just sticks a hand into your bag.
So my policy is the same there. Meaning if you're decided that you're going to have a gun there, you're either not allowed to leave or you're taking it with you. So you're making the decision to be able to carry in that position. Good for you. That's your decision. That's your choice. Because of policies, legalities, halachic reasons, whatever it might be, that's your decision. However, with that decision means that your day-to-day life has become changed now. And you have to stick with it. It's
his responsibility to make sure he has eyes on that bag all the time.
Basically. All the time.
You can't, even a second.
So if you're going to daven with it, then that means your sitter could be on top of it, so you have access to it, and then no one will touch it. Or it has to be more than just an arm's reach. You have to have more control over that bag than anyone else.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so let's go next to the sequence. You carried him properly. You had your holster broke, something, you dropped the gun. You're a legal gun owner. What do? You look, you can't find it. There's a lot to be said there also. First step is to, first of all, it's good to try to backtrack your steps to find out where it is. Before you end up reporting it as stolen, it would be good to try to figure out maybe what happened to it to see what you could do. So if you notice that your holster broke, then trying to determine where it went. Now, let's say you travel 45 minutes to work every day. So the amount of locations it's able to be is uncountable, right? So that obviously leaves a bigger issue. So step number one is don't be afraid to report it to the police, because what could be worse would be that it's not reported to the police, and then shortly after it's used in some kind of situation that you didn't want it to be used in, and now it's associated with you, but you didn't report it, but you knew that it was missing. So that becomes a risky situation to be part of. So there's no problem in being able to report it. But the question I often ask people is,
So you lost your firearm, right? Do you know the serial number of your firearm? Like, do you have a paper somewhere of the make and model serial number of your firearm? The value is that it is on record. That is something that is recorded when you purchase a firearm. Your name and your serial number is attached to each other. However, it's easier or more beneficial that if you go to the police department and say, I lost a black Glock 19, it's 9mm, here's the serial number associated with it. It's somewhere between here and here, right? So by giving that kind of detailed report, you're giving them more information up front, which could be valuable to you, instead of assuming that they might know. So also, if you have multiple Glock 19s, because you train a lot and you have multiple sets of firearms, then which one is the one that's missing and which one are you telling them is actually gone? So if you have 5 Glock 19s and one of them is gone now, you could either, if you don't know the serial numbers, that could be a problem, or you just can't identify which is the one that you're reporting as the issue. So right. It's good to have that kind of record somewhere.
Right. So in other words, if you do lose it, own up to it. Look for it.
Yes.
And if you need help, if you need to call your friends to help you look, you need to call local Shamram Chaverim to help with a search, do it. And then later, if it gets more serious, call the police. Maybe the sheriff's
owning up to it is helping you. That's the perspective. You need to have that as perspective, because it's what owning up to it means is that you're making sure on record that you're not associated with the risk of anything that happens to that firearm. That's
you did the right thing. You made right.
Yes.
And there's other things. I assume that there's like K9 dogs that can track guns
to an extent, because usually they need the matching scent, meaning of you as the person, and then they could potentially backtrack it potentially. However, you never know if it was taken or moved. Like, there is that potential. Also, I could be wrong about this. Not necessarily every law enforcement has access to canine units that have specifically canine units that are tracking canine units, which is a separate animal entirely. But it's still like, it's better that you have it on record that you did the right thing and you're good.
Right, and I think also when it comes to canine dogs, when it comes to sensing bombs and explosives, each type of component, each type of bomb, each type of chemical needs to be trained separately. So if it's going to be trained for guns, it's a separate.
It's more than guns, because if they're tracking for the person to the gun, they're tracking the person's scent to the person's scent that was attached to the firearm. So they would have to find you, they would have to find the scent of you, and then they would have to find the gun that now is. So they're not looking for the gun, they're looking for a duplicate of your scent.
Right, got it. Okay, now on to the next thing. How do you teach kids to keep their hands off guns? Because there's so many toys with guns, and a lot of kids grow up with, different toys, different guns, and then there's movies. I know in other communities it's more, some of them are less. And then there's also the factor that it's not that commonly spoken guns. So
that's a part of the risk. So for my children, as an example, right? They're going to be the kids that are able to go to school, and they're going to say that their father deals with guns for a living. So I'm a person that I'm not able to avoid it even if I wanted to, just because you're worried about the fact that your kids are going to say the word gun in school, and that's scary. So because of my reputation, because people know me, it's less of a risk because it's very clear what I do. Now, for other parents, it might be more of a risk, either because they don't want necessarily the word to be able to get out, or they just don't want that people know that they have a firearm. That's going to be up to them to make that decision. In regards to the children knowing about firearms, though, it's just like any other tool that you have available to yourself. So if I want to do a woodworking project with my kid, I'm going to let him use the drill, right? But now, if he's right now 2 years old, I'm not going to let him use my real drill. I'll let him use a toy version of the drill. But as he gets older, there's going to be an age where I will let him hold the actual drill while being monitored and make sure that we're doing it safely. But he's going to be able to use it for himself with parental supervision. So the same thing applies, that if you want to teach your kids about guns, what children are very curious. That's what they are. So by taking away the mystery of a firearm and educating them on what it is, you already reduce the risk of anything super dangerous, because they understand. So it's not a scary item that we never speak about it, we never touch it, because that only makes them more interesting for them to be able to be a part of it. So
right. At a young age, they might listen and not touch it, but the minute they become 10 and 11, when their curiosity peaks and they're more capable of getting access to it, even though it's locked, then is when you're going to have a problem.
So I'm going to introduce it to them earlier than that, but it doesn't mean they're allowed to touch it. So if my kid at 5 years old, like, it's inevitable, because again, for my career, it is what I do. So guns are around. So it's not like I'll just be able to avoid it entirely, but it doesn't mean that he's going to be able to touch it or be able to use it without parental supervision or without a safety briefing first. So we say the word safety briefing and it sounds super intense, but that's what we're doing for a kid, is introducing them safely to the platform in a way that we know that it's not going to be dangerous. And the simplest way to start off is with Nerf guns, because they're not dangerous at all, but you treat them like real guns so he learns about firearm safety. Then you could escalate to, let's say, BB guns, which now have an actual projectile. And then from there, you go to 22s. And then there's a step-by-step process of how you're able to integrate in the safest way possible firearms education to children.
Right. Okay. So to sum it up, you teach your kids that a gun is just like a knife. It's like matches. It's something that you don't touch because they could be extremely dangerous. And if for some reason you do have to, it's with supervision and with very special care. Now,
as an example, by the way, for what I did with my younger sister, when I was living at home, I was still 18. I was like in yeshiva, but I had a firearm already because I was already 18. And my younger sister, she was probably, let's say 11 at the time, whatever. She was interested in being able to learn about guns, maybe, and like just be able to be a part of it. So my rule with her is, and she knew the rule was, that if you want to touch the gun, even touch it, you have to repeat the 4 firearm safety rules to me every single time. So it doesn't matter how many times we've done this. Before I hand you the gun, you have to tell me the firearm safety rules. We'll speak about what each one means. So in the moment now, so if we're in an apartment building, right, then which direction is safe for the location we're currently at to have the gun pointed? What do we have to be aware of when the gun is being pointed at? Where do we keep our finger, right? But every time I decided that I wanted to be able to hand her the firearm, she had to repeat those, and it became a part of a routine that she knew that was a part of the process to be able to even be allowed to touch it. Right. And that's how it worked.
Now, once we're on this, what would you say are let's go back to the original when you started, 4 rules for kids. What would you say those rules are?
So the 4 rules for kids are about rules that you, when a kid is not supposed to be touching guns, period. So what that means is that it's not the firearm safety rules of going to the range. Those are the separate rules that they would have to abide by the same way adults do. That's the 4 standard rules for firearm safety. The rules for children is if you discover a gun, or if, let's say, I made a absolutely horrible mistake and left my unloaded firearm on the kitchen counter, right? Rule number 1 as adults is you have to treat old guns as if they're loaded. So for us, that's a huge problem, even if it's empty, because that's still a rule that was immediately broken. So for the child, the rules that you're teaching them are: rule number 1 is stop. Before you do anything, stop so you can think. Stop. Rule number 2 is don't touch. Because let's say it was a criminal used gun. We're not worried about the kid's serial number being associated and now they're going to be connected to the murder. We're worried about if there is a fingerprint on it that could be connected to an actual case. By you touching it, you're removing that fingerprint, which is why we don't want to touch it. So we're not worried about you now being convicted as a murderer. We're being worried that the person who could be convicted on a crime is now not able to be convicted. So don't touch, right? It's also don't touch because you don't want your kid to actually touch it if it's loaded or anything like that. Leave the area because you can't assume that other kids are going to be as smart as your kid to know the rules. So you want your kid at the minimum to leave and not be involved in whatever might happen next. And the last rule is tell an adult so that someone else of a higher authority will be able to deal with that in a better way. So those are the 4 rules: is stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult.
Right. So when you had your sister touch the gun at the age of 12, did you made her repeat these rules or the actual rules of firearms?
I made her repeat it. Since she was actually going to be holding the actual firearm, I made her repeat the rules of an adult. So the 4 rules of an adult is assume every single gun is loaded. Make sure to keep your finger high off the trigger. Keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. And assuming you were to fire, be aware of your target's foreground and background before pulling the trigger. She had to repeat those rules because she was actually now holding a firearm that was under supervision.
All right. Okay. I'm going to try to make flyers for 2 sets of flyers for the basic rules and the kids rules, and I'm going to upload it, and I'm going to put links in the description of this video, so it's going to be available for download.
A part of, by the way, like as a plug to a friend of both of us,
right.
We have a friend, Yehuda Reamer, who writes safety and children's books, for like gun safety for children. So he has quite a few books and also like some comical books and interesting books that you could check out. So if you're looking for like a comic style book or just a kid's written and designed book that talks about firearm safety, he has one like the ABCs for guns and like 1, 2, 3 safety off, I believe. He has a few different ones, but that might be also a good way to integrate safety while having a more fun and visual aspect for children as well.
Right. So I'll probably want to do a follow-up interview with him and go a little bit more in depth.
Yeah.
About teaching kids aspect of it. But yeah, if you want, I'll probably include those as well. Okay. So now, I guess at what age do you think can you actually go teach the kid how to use a gun? Is it an age thing or it's a maturity level?
It's definitely a maturity thing. I've had kids who came to our to classes of mine, like they came to our like rifle classes, right, which is generally more intense, and they were, let's say, 12 years old at a rifle class. But to be at a rifle class means that you're not having someone on top of you monitor the whole time. You're a part of a course of people. So to be a part of that kind of class means that the kid was more mature or more, he was more early on introduced into firearm safety and rules. So for him, it was just a part of second nature almost. So throughout the whole class, he had his finger on the safety lever of the AR and his finger high off the trigger. So he knew in both cases that the gun was on safe and his finger was off. So that's just a maturity thing. Now, to what degree a kid's going to be introduced is going to be different. Meaning, to go to a class is one thing. To go to the range as a side thing, that's up to a parent to decide. But also, that's not a class. Meaning, you're not worried about him just going, transitioning target to target and reloading and doing all that. It's more about just being able to experience firearms. So I think like maybe 7 years old, you could go younger. Again, it's a kid to kid thing, but it doesn't mean that there isn't an introduction before that to firearms. So I would probably introduce my kid before the age of 7 to airsoft guns, which again, I know are not lethal. They could be dangerous, but again, it's still under the same supervision as it would be as a firearm. And from early on in their ages, they're treating it like a real gun. So when they hold a real gun, that transition should be seamless.
Right. Now, what about toy guns? Is it allowed in your house?
Absolutely, for sure. So now, for kids in general, there's going to be this is something I teach for the active shooter lockdown courses that I do. So I go to schools and we do lockdown drills with teachers and staff, right? There are two types of teachers. There's the teacher during the regular course of the year, and then there's the teacher during an active shooting. They're very, very different people. It's the same person, but they're different people. What that means is that during the time that you're a teacher throughout the year, kids may or may not be able to take advantage of you as a teacher because they have you throughout the entire year. If, God forbid, a lockdown is called throughout a school, that teacher becomes an unarguable different person. Like they're not the same human being as they were a second before that, because now they're in a different mindset entirely. So for that person, right, and for those students, everything changes. So the same applies in regards to toy guns and anything that you'll determine or classify as a real firearm. So if my kid's playing with Nerf guns or water guns or whatever, do whatever you want. It's not a real gun. Once we go to the position where we're training, even with airsoft guns, right, we're still going to go through the firearms rules. We're still going to be very careful of the direction the barrel's pointing. They know that when they step into that environment, it's a different thing. The same also applies for dry fire training. So we're professionals, we're adults, and we're training with guns. So it doesn't matter what your background is, right? When you start dry fire training, there's a few things you're doing. I'm making sure there's no ammunition in the room. I'm making sure that I'm taking this seriously as a real training aid. And I'm making sure that all the same firearms rules apply because I'm still training as if it was a real gun. So there's the aspect of it not being real or just this is not a real thing to training to real live fire where your mental perspective could very dramatically change.
Right. So in terms of like actually teaching children not to touch the gun, how would that conversation go? Like you have toy guns in the house, so you're okay with that. How will you go about it?
So me personally will be different, obviously, than someone else. But for me, the conversation or the topic of guns is around. So it's something that's spoken about. So they may not have seen it yet. They may not have touched it yet, but the conversation is there. So it would usually go into a form of interest. So a kid would be like, either I want to see it or I want to learn more about it. Like they'll say something that will make you understand that they want to learn or see more about this thing you're speaking about. What I would do at that point is we'd have a conversation before we even get involved in that. Like, sure, just understand that it's a very serious thing. We'll talk about the rules. We'll talk about the seriousness of it. So before they even get into the position of being able to see or touch it, there's a conversation that has been had about what you're about to get yourself involved in. And then after that point, you're going to bring out to the firearm to a safe location, again, making sure all the things are safe and clear. You'll reiterate everything you just said again. Then you'll make sure to teach the safety rules on top of that and make sure that as every step goes on, they're very aware of what each of those rules are. They have to repeat after each rule that you say to make sure it's very clearly heard about what you're doing. Then you introduce it, and over time, they develop that understanding more.
Right. And if it's a household with no firearms and the parents are scared that and the parents are scared that the kid is going to stumble upon one and touch it, how would that conversation happen? How would you go about it?
So the majority of the time, the parents I've spoken to that were interested in having firearms in the house but don't, it's usually because of child safety, which is completely understandable. But what's not understood or looked into is the amount of ways that a firearm is able to be stored safely without that being a risk. The two most common is a safe and hidden in plain sight. So I'm actually going to be doing a video probably next week that's going to be released on different hidden in plain sight options. But there's options that are like similar to a shelf that looks like a shelf, but you use like an RFID or a key that makes it unlock so you can access firearms. So the kid can't stumble upon it unless they break it, which is another issue entirely. Then there is safes, which means there's a safe for theft and there's a safe for accidental access, meaning the safe that I have at home is just so my kid doesn't touch it, but I'm not worried about someone breaking it and stealing it because, again, that's a whole different problem entirely. Then I have, for other guns, I have like a gun room. So for me personally, I have an area that is fully locked off. It's fully secure. There's multiple ways that have to be accessed before you're able to gain access to the room. So it depends on the category. So for a parent that's worried, step number one is to make sure that you have a safe that you're comfortable with and that you have quick access to, and that you'd be happy knowing that even if a kid gains access to that piece, they're not able to gain access to the gun itself. So once you have that immediately reduces it. But assuming they find the safe, that's the same way the conversation could begin. This is a firearm. Let's talk about it. And before, or they don't know what's inside of it. So you could just say jewelry and put it away. If you want to be that parent, that's fine also. But it all seems like it would start from a point where you have a safe first, to make sure that you feel comfortable knowing that they can't accidentally gain access to it.
Right. Now, what if you do not have guns at home? You're not a gun owner, but you're scared another story like what happened in Monsey is going to happen.
So that's where the 4 rules come in for children, right? The same 4 rules apply of being able to stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult, because you understand that you may not be a gun family, which again, that's up to you, that's fine. But by doing so, you're also just making sure that your kid will be safe if they do encounter. Now, the unfortunate variable to take into account is that for a kid who's never had exposure to a firearm, for the first time they see a gun, the 4 rules are going to be a kid's version of going through tunnel vision, having an adrenaline rush, because they're actually seeing this is a gun and like this is a real thing, right? Versus a kid who has exposure and learned the same rules, he'll see the gun, he'll know it's a gun, right? And he'll go through the process maybe with a less amount of stress because they have that experience with what a firearm is and what it's like. So the kid who's never had exposure versus the kid has had exposure might be able to interact with that kind of scenario differently.
Right. So the scenario with a kid who never had exposure will have higher adrenaline rush, and it will result in what? More panicking or more
potentially,
curiosity?
or forgetting the rules, or not knowing necessarily remembering what to do next. Which is this. The thing is that have you ever taught your kid about how to use a fire extinguisher? And then if you were to 3 months later come up to him and ask him how to use it, would he still remember, right? So it's something that has to be constantly retaught and re-ingrained to make sure that they know about it. So to have a kid who is not very often refreshed or knowledgeable on it, and then they see it, it's very easy to forget because it's not a part of their training habit. So they could get more nervous. They could forget the rules potentially. Or they might go through the process accidentally by going to tell a teacher, but not doing the conscious stop, don't touch. They might just run.
Right.
So in that case, that's fine, right? But you don't want it to be a risk where a kid's like, but maybe it's not a problem that another kid convinces them that it might be okay. Like that's a part of the risk of stop, don't touch before going to tell an adult.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Any closing thoughts? Is there anything you want to add to our conversation, or anything you think important people should know that we missed?
I think a part of the recap that's important is that if you have a firearm, you're choosing to live a life that's different than what you were living before. It's extremely, extremely important that's understood because you're adding a variable into your life that will be able to protect you, but also, just like anything else, will be able to cause a risk if it's done incorrectly. A part of everything we spoke about today is all about training, because if you went to a even basic training class and you spoke to an instructor about what holster you should get, how it should be stored, what should be done around children, these are all things that should be actively always pursued because you're dealing with something that's a life and death item. So if you're going to be a collector, that's up to you. That's your prerogative. But if you're going to be using it in any form of self-defense, it's not like driving a car and then not driving for a year or two and then driving a car again. It is a easily forgotten skill, as well as also things like malfunctions and other variables like that can make a difference in regards to your performance. So you're choosing a life of not just being able to own a firearm, but live that life of constantly training and making yourself better to be as proficient as possible for yourself, for your family, and the people that you're carrying around you.
Where can people find you? Where can people learn more about you?
I'm most active on YouTube and Instagram. So if you look up the Tactical Rabbi, you should be able to find me on YouTube and Instagram. You could also reach out to me on my website, which is ndftraining.com. If you go there, I also have online classes. So a lot of what we spoke about today, you could do an online training. So there's Firearms 101. So if you don't have a gun at all, you could learn about all that information there. If you have a gun, you're just getting started, we have Tactical Pistol. If you just got a rifle, there's Tactical Rifle. So a lot of value there to be able to be learned from as well. If you have any questions, reach out. Like that's a very valuable thing, that it's better you're getting proper information than just staying in the unknown. If we're able to help, we'll make it happen.
Right. Thank you very, very much for, giving me your time. And
I appreciate your time.
I think this matter is extremely, extremely important for us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.